Hello and welcome back to the Villa podcast. I'm here as always with my good friend Dan Wiseman. Dan, Liverpool 2, Aston Villa 1. First of all, mate, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. The afternoon has consisted of me watching the Villa game, obviously, and the disappointment that then was, to then pinning all of my hopes on Milan native in the Grand National, a little outsider who I fancied. And now that's a mugs game, is pinning your hopes on a horse in the Grand National, because you after watching about 10 seconds, you quickly realise why I know absolutely nothing and will never know anything about horse racing. It's really, really not for me. So, yeah, about £5 down.
But
Moods
to
in.
any future employers, we love horse racing. We know
Oh,
we're so
absolutely.
knowledgeable.
We welcome any sponsors within that industry. But mate, my afternoon is made all the better by seeing your fine self.
Likewise, man, it feels like it's been a while. The international break was a lot longer than I think we hoped for and or expected. And we're in this final kind of stint of the season now, I believe, with 8 games left to play for Villa with a game in hand, which is absolutely wonderful. 8 very tough games as well, Dan. And this is just one of them that we managed to get out of the way with Liverpool. And I think the first thing that needs to be highlighted is overall, as we just kind of discussed off air, Dan, this was a pretty poor game from both sides. It's certainly not one that would have got the neutral excited today. I'm sure many people would have tuned in hoping for yet another Liverpool defeat, as they, up until today, had not won at home in the Premier League in the year 2021. So, I mean, Aston Villa, there you go, putting it on a plate for you. As always, Premier League teams can always rely on Villa to help them break their duck. And I think, as I highlighted in the preview, the game management of this game is so important. And I kind of alluded to a bit of air of uncertainty as to how I perhaps thought that Villa and Dean should set up and who should come in. I was a big advocate for Marvelous Nakamba. I didn't particularly think he had a great game today. I still think that Villa kind of benefited from having him in the first half. I hope that his substitution did not come through injury, as James Milner seemed to leave a bit on him, didn't he, before he came off, which isn't very nice to see if you're Marvelous Nakamba. But, you know, Dean had a decision, and let's be honest, it was an easy one. Do I go 4-4-2 or do I stick 4-3-3? Had we have gone 4-4-2, Dan, I think it's safe to say this game is over before it even starts. Again, something we alluded to in the preview. Liverpool's midfield three, regardless of who is in there. Today we had Fabinho, we had James Milner, and Gini Wijnaldum. They outrun the two in midfield. That's just how it works. I was actually kind of confused. I understand the sentiment. Villa got the goals against Fulham in 4-4-2, but there are definitely formations and systems that lend themselves to situations. And of course, 4-4-2 was never going to be at all appropriate against Liverpool. But it's a difficult one, really, Dan, because I feel like the midfield is the area that is constantly letting Aston Villa down. And it's really difficult because I feel like we had this nailed down in the first half of the season. We had a starting 11 that you could rely on every single game. The team essentially picked itself. And, you're coming in today, looking at the lineup, you can't help but feel like JJ is a bit hard done, because Villa, of course, looked so much better when he came on against Fulham. Morgan Sanson, again, has every right to feel aggrieved not to start, especially when Ross Barkley eventually comes on later on in the game and doesn't set the world alight. Again, no sort of agenda, but I feel like Ross's time at Villa is now up, Dan. I feel like it's almost a lose-lose for Dean in this situation, because, although we got the win, things aren't really going our way. Obviously, the news of Jack Grealish being out for a long time is certainly going to make the club feel somewhat sorry for themselves, Dan, I think is maybe fair to say. But, these boys, they proved last week that they could win without Jack. So I kind of feel like Dean was almost in a lose-lose situation regardless, because Villa Twitter especially was certainly so divided on how Villa should approach this game.
Yeah, it's one of those, mate, where I think we did see certain faction. Well, I'd say more than a faction. I'd say it's becoming a majority now of the Villa fan base. It's sort of semi-appeased because I think we saw John in some more advanced positions. Nice to see him get the assist as well. I think we saw him operating in not quite you watch him play for Scotland, he is an out-and-out 10. And I think that's largely because of Scotland lacking in those forward positions that I think they play John further forward. And I don't think realistically we'll ever see him playing as an out-and-out 10 in this Villa team. No. But, you see he was certainly more progressive. He gets the assist today, as I was saying. And so I think it's good to see that's the issue of where he fits into that midfield and exactly what his role is. Might be lending itself towards something slightly more attacking, because I think it is frustrating to see him go away and do what he does on an international stage and then come back for Villa and ask to be doing something which I think if you watch the interviews, I don't think he's 100% sure he should be doing. So it was nice to see that, and I did support the 4-3-3, and I think ultimately now, to everyone listening to this podcast, well, I really want to see the two up front. I would be really interested to see how it works, but I don't think we'll see it permanently.
No.
Dean Smith has built an entire, managers come with philosophies, and I don't think Dean has fully unveiled his philosophy yet at Villa, but they have principles. Dean Smith has played a 4-3-3 or a variation of a 4-2-3-1, whatever you want to call it, everywhere he has been. He's not about to leave it now just because, as with Villa in the position they are in the table, he has us in the top half of the table playing a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1, depending on how you want to look at that formation. That's the way it's going to stay. You can't make such a dramatic switch permanently halfway through a season, I don't think. No. Having played 4-3-3 for years, like the lads that have been here since Dean first came in for years, if you switch that without the necessary training, without the work on the training ground, that's something for pre-season that you can work on, remodel that formation when you've got all the lads there in a core, no stresses of other games, etc., etc. So I think the three in midfield was always the way it was going to go. But for me, the game was not lost in a formational sense. I think the midfield, Villa as a entity, really, with the architects of our own downfall, especially in the first half, all of the biggest chances that Liverpool had were from Villa mistakes.
Yeah.
We do our best on this podcast, Dan, to support Tyrone Mings, but sometimes he doesn't help himself, does he? You sort of watch him make that mistake he did in the first half and think, come on, we are rooting for you, Tyrone, on the Villa podcast. Come on.
We love you.
We need you to start backing us up. Villa, that just sort of summed it up. John McGinn was playing some wayward passes that got intercepted. And all of Liverpool's best chances came from Villa mistakes. They had 9 shots from inside the box in the first half. And when Villa went in leading, it almost felt not quite undeserved, but like we were riding our luck. And that's frustrating because when you're playing a side like Liverpool, you need to eradicate those mistakes that you make.
I feel like we've had that feeling half-time in the last game at Villa Park down there in the Premier League, didn't we? With it being so, it was such a convincing win, of course, but it's Liverpool. There's this aura, and as we kind of alluded to earlier, the fact they haven't won at home in the Premier League this year, in 2021, you still can't help but feel threatened by Liverpool, because when they have a forward line of Mohamed Salah, Diogo Jota, and Roberto Firmino, with like the likes of Sadio Mane and Xherdan Shaqiri yet to come off the bench, then you have plenty of reasons to be worried. And again, this is something that I alluded to in the preview. The wing play from both sides was going to be really important to this game. And I think, it's so easy to say had Jack Grealish been fit, this is a different game, of course. But for me, you just got to look, Trent Alexander-Arnold made the most amount of tackles in the Liverpool side, only second to Matt Targett in the whole game, who made 4, Trent with 3. And looking at the kind of positions that Trent's occupying, he's well in Villa's half. Looking at where Trezeguet is, he's exactly where you want him to be, exactly where I highlighted for him to be. Kind of almost in line with Watkins in, well in Liverpool's half, exploiting that space in behind. Didn't quite go Trezeguet's way there, of course. He had many wonderful chances, but, you just got to look at the other players that are in the top 5 boxes. You've got Target, you've got Trent Alexander-Arnold. Matty Cash is also in there as well. So that really demonstrates how important the fullbacks were to both sides, nullifying the threats either end, using the wingers and the fullbacks as Liverpool do so well. And I think to kind of dial it back and look at what Villa did really well in this game, Dan, is Villa had 9 attempts and 8 from open play, and they scored a goal. And you compare that to Liverpool's 23 attempts, 15 from open play, they scored 2. Villa were clinical when they needed to be in that first half. I say when they needed to be. They needed to be more clinical in the second half, to be honest, with some of the chances that we were creating, or half chances of that. John McGinn does really, it's a wonderfully weighted pass for McGinn. And I think the move just kind of perfectly summed up. I think Villa often sweat the basics and we try and overcomplicate things so much. And you can see Ollie's saying, put the ball on a plate here, let me do the rest. And what happens? Villa go 1-0 up. You just kind of have to work it to Ollie a bit more. And there were instances, more specifically in the first half, where Trezeguet and Bertrand maybe too selfish, weren't necessarily picking the right pass or looking for Ollie. And when he's working as relentlessly as he is, you can't help but feel frustrated for Watkins, because he covers so much ground, he does so much. He's obviously had like 3 goals ruled out from VAR, which is a subject we will come on to very shortly, Dan. Sometimes I just feel like the service isn't good enough, and of course, without Jack Grealish there, it's going to be significantly lower. Which again, it's highlighted in all the stats, Dan, and it's most of the play came from Villa's left. Again, as we expected, with the attacking output from Trent for Liverpool, and with Villa's just natural sort of top heaviness towards that left-hand side, even without Jack Grealish. But sort of coming into the second half, Dan, it felt almost too good to be true, because Villa were in this game for the longest time, weren't they?
Yeah, we were, mate. And that was, hey, optimism on the Villa podcast. Get used to it. It's coming. We didn't play very well today. I didn't think we played badly, but it wasn't Villa at their best.
Absolutely not.
I thought we were quite frustrating at times, actually. We were sloppy. I don't think we ever really generated a good spell continuously in the game. We struggled to build momentum. Moves felt a little bit stagnated. We struggled under press a little bit at times. But we were winning for a large portion of the game. This is sort of what I felt, is that I was watching the game thinking, this isn't a great performance. And then you're like, we're drawing 1-1 with Liverpool at Anfield, the home of the Premier League champions. It's like, if you can go there and play okay and still be in that position to, bar a Trent Weldy, go and take points from a game, that's a really good going. I mean, I know that Liverpool aren't the beast that they were last season. I know that. But they're still Liverpool. They still have now the player tied for the Golden Boot. They still have an array of players, as you were touching on, Dan, that, like, when you see them line up, I mean, bar maybe Nat Phillips, who I thought was really good today, actually, and Ozan Kabak. That's a star-studded team, and like you kind of was like, you go like, wow, like these guys haven't won in 2021. There's still, the players are still there, the pieces are still there, and you get the feeling with Liverpool, it can at any given moment, and they're back.
Yeah,
I don't think we saw that today, but Villa, it's difficult to say we did our duties, and because we weren't clinical enough, but when it mattered at the end of that first half, we took the chance. And Ollie Watkins, we wanted to play Liverpool every week, because the guy just scores against them. This is a really, apart from the stat, this was an amazing, I don't know if you heard this on Sky, there was a stat they said just before the teams walked out of the second half, and they were like, Liverpool haven't, this was a genuine stat, it was like, Liverpool haven't won on the same day as the Grand National at Anfield since the year the Queen was coronated. I was like, that is the most
really
outrageous.
Specific.
It's like, okay, what do I do with that information? But if we're talking the most goals against Liverpool in a single Premier League season, Ollie Watkins now has 4, which is obviously the same amount that Andre Arshavin managed for Arsenal in the 2008 to 2009 season. Difference is, whilst Ollie managed 3 in one game against Liverpool, Andre Arshavin famously managed 4. We all remember that celebration.
What a game.
That was brilliant. That's pure.
Wow.
That's a fine wine of Premier League football. Other players to have managed 4 goals against Liverpool in one season: Mark Viduka, Andy Cole. But unfortunately, it's not the most. Matt Letizia did get 5 in 93, 94, but that's some really esteemed company for Ollie Watkins there, and I'm really happy to see him get on that score sheet because it'd been 8 games before the Fulham game. It'd been 8 games without a goal, and it was dragging on a little bit for Ollie there. So I'm delighted with him. That's a quarter of all the goals he scored this season has now come against Liverpool, which is remarkable, really. But yeah, we then had the VAR call, didn't we, Dan? And this is something that I tweeted off the account as well, and I was not sure how that would go down, to be honest with you. I just sort of said that I don't enjoy seeing that. Even I was delighted that Villa went in leading. Obviously, that's not what I'm saying, but it's like all the lines, the sleeves, and the how long it takes is like no matter what the outcome is, whether it works for Villa or not, I can't support that. I can't get behind that and genuinely feel good about that working because I'm a football fan, Dan. And that's why I love this game. That's why you love this game. And it's like, it was ridiculously tight, and even whether Matty Cash did or didn't touch it is very hard to say. I think they got that part right, but it was so tight. But we got to get used to it now, unfortunately, haven't we?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you knew last night after Willian Jose's goal got ruled out that there was going to be another glaring mistake, dare I say, in the following set of games the next day. That's going to happen. That's the way it is. The officiating has been a joke throughout the whole season. You just kind of have to take it as it comes, really. I think, a big complaint just about VAR and how these offsides are done in general is the cameras aren't straight. If you're going to be drawing lines, you have to have, 10, maybe 12 cameras all along the pitch side so as you can get that angle correct. Because, maybe if you look at that straight on, I was pretty convinced as soon as the ball was played that Diogo Jota was offside. But, the lines were drawn. It's all pretty sketchy. With the goals that Ollie Watkins has had ruled off this season, I'm not going to complain too much, but I feel like we can't really take this kind of passive, it swings and roundabouts approach, because then there's no change and it is slowly killing the game. So it's something that absolutely has to be called out. Dan, I know you despise VAR talk on the Villa Filler podcast, but it does, it genuinely changes the game if Liverpool score there. The momentum heavily swings in their way, despite, going into halftime pretty soon after. I think a big frustration about Villa, and this is totally evidenced in the stats that I'm about to back up this point with here, is, they looked lethargic. It seemed laboured to try and string some passes together. The movement wasn't quite great off the ball. Villa only managed a total of 300 passes compared to Liverpool's 605, with an average pass streak of 3. You've not really got the ball for longer than 20 seconds there when you sort of break it down. And Liverpool's average pass streak was only 5. But again, these were two sides that definitely weren't at the pinnacle of performance. That is very fair to say. And again, you made the point earlier, Dan. Both of the goals that Villa conceded, actually, they so frustratingly come from mistakes that Villa have made when in possession, being careless, not looking after that ball. And I was actually convinced watching it in real time that Ty may have headed that in for the first one for Mo Salah, which is a frustrating one. And I think the last one, if we're going to take any positives from this game, and guys, I'm really clutching at straws here. Jacob has to close down Trent, right? He does. There is no excuse. But, it's a learning curve. He's going to know for next time. I don't think Jacob is the kind of kid to make the same mistake twice. I hope people aren't giving him too much of a hard time on social media. Again, as I mentioned in the last podcast, just kind of stay off Twitter really as much as possible. It's not really a good place, especially when Villa lose. A wonderfully taken goal by Trent Alexander-Arnold, and it's a shame because Emi makes a save that is worthy of a point for Villa to initially keep Thiago out, I believe, from close range. Falls perfectly to Trent, and in that kind of position, he's gonna opt to curl that one into the top corner. But Dan, I mean, I'm gonna let you go with the XG today because you were eager in telling me that you have your numbers. So please fire away.
Yeah. Well, there's two things I want to highlight when it comes to XG. The first is that Liverpool are a side who are underperforming as to their XG this season. And that's about 6.1, which after today's game has gone up to about 6.2, 6.3. So I'll come on to the XG from this game. And that was reflected in the first half, wasn't it? I mean, Liverpool, as I said, 9 shots from inside the box. They had 23 shots today, Liverpool. But in the game itself, Villa registered an XG of 0.67, with Liverpool racking up 2.37 in a 2-1 win. So it reads pretty accurately, to be honest with you. It's a remarkably similar XG to the Man City Leeds game, with both sides having that same, but that was flipped. The scoreline was flipped the other way around. It's really interesting to see. You talk about Villa holding on to the ball and maximising that thing. And when you talk about Liverpool underperforming their XG and looking into that side of thing and that unreliability in the team, Liverpool have made, and this is a metric I had to do some digging for, Daniel, the third most missed controls.
Wow.
The third most was 387 this season. So the third most missed controls in the Premier League with 387. And they've made the most errors leading to opponent shot in the Premier League with 18. And so I don't think Villa did enough to maximise that and create chances of our own, because we've seen how, the stats are there. You press Liverpool, you force them into situations and break those passing rhythms, and you can get something out of that back line. I don't think Villa did that enough today, and that was annoying. But bringing it back to the XG, mate, I think it reads pretty fairly. It was one of those where it's only really after the game where you start looking into the stats and how dominant Liverpool were that you sort of go, that it was coming. And I don't think anyone was too bitterly surprised when that goal goes in. Liverpool had 23 shots to our 9, 10 on target to our 5, a passing accuracy of about 20% more. You mentioned the amount of passes more that they'd made, the possessions 67% to 33. The Liverpool were banging on the door for the longest time. And of course, with Gareth Southgate at Anfield, Trent goes and scores what is a fantastic goal. But just before I throw it back to you, mate, on that point about JJ, you're right. He should have closed him down. He should have gone again. But you're playing a 19-year-old kid in his first season in the Premier League, and that comes with pros and with cons. The pros are he's building valuable match experience. He's a good player. There's a player in him. I think, again, he's approaching that crucial age, which I think Villa have gotten wrong in recent years, where it's like he needs to continue this time. Like, he either on loan or with the club, you need to be able to guarantee him this playing time. And he's approaching that age. It's good that we're giving him the minutes. But when you play a 19-year-old, you're going to get mistakes. And whilst JJ, there hasn't been glaringly obvious errors yet. And I think this one is one where, in hindsight, he probably should have closed him down. I think it's like oh my God, what is he doing? But there's going to be mistakes, and you can't be too harsh on JJ. That's the nature of the game, and we're in the business of giving this kid minutes, and that instance won't change that.
No, of course not. And almost sort of ironically frustrating that he kind of ends up running into Ross Barkley, which leads to this whole situation transpiring. So JJ is maybe saying a victim of circumstances a bit unfair on him and what happened, but I feel leading on to Ross Barkley, and again at a point I alluded to earlier, the game management wasn't really there from Villa, Dan. I feel like we praised Dean for making the substitutes and somehow managing to kind of get the goals against Fulham. It wasn't really coherent. Clear we went to a 4-4-2, just kind of gung-ho, crosses into the box, let's see what works. But today things were a bit different. Things were a bit confusing. obviously Douglas Luiz injures himself in the first half, and Jacob Ramsey is set to be introduced and is then shown back to his seat on the bench. But then Villa's first substitution is Ross Barkley, which is you can question that, because if JJ was going to come on in the first half, then what circumstances have changed for Ross to warrant a substitution over him? I can understand the sort of psychological aspect of, it's Liverpool. He tore them a new one last time. Everton fan against his arch nemesis. You kind of got, that's all, you're clutching on straws here, because we haven't really seen Ross in the longest time. And when we have, things haven't been great. And then we see Anwar introduced on the right, which is, again, something that he's not a right winger, Dean. You play with these inverted wingers. He's right-footed. He scores his goals on the back post at the left. So that didn't really make sense to me. And then when you're kind of putting JJ on, it's like, right, okay, well, you're actually going right wing, sort of an auxiliary winger. Just, it didn't really seem to make sense, Dan. The game, and I know we get so much stick for this, Dan, the Keenan Villa podcast, the game lent itself to Keenan coming on for Bertrand Traore, who didn't really have a good game, but you needed more of a focal point, because more than anything, Dan, Villa played 77 long balls, which is almost double that of what Liverpool played. Only 218 short passes. Every time Emi had the ball, it was a clearance. It was a huge kick upfield. You need it to stick to someone. And with how sort of sketchy the defence was for Liverpool on paper, I think, Phillips and Kabak had an okay game. There was the odd misplaced pass, which Villa should have really capitalised on a bit better. But you need Keenan on there just to bruise him up, mate, don't you? But that's for me, the most glaringly obvious mistake that I feel like Dean made was not bringing him on. And I find it confusing, because if I'm correct, Keenan came on in the fixture at Anfield last season, where Villa very almost stole a point. So I can't really understand the reasoning as to why the substitutes happened and why some didn't, Dan. But, I think we're definitely not alone in thinking that this was a game that lent itself to the impacts of Keenan Van Nistelrooy, Dan.
Yeah, mate, it's to be honest, I came on this podcast thinking, damn, we were really unfortunate not to walk away with the point. And as we've started speaking and laying down the stats, I was like, maybe not. Maybe not. But no, it's again, this is another thing which sort of contradicts the stats, is that I don't think Dean's game management is brilliant. But before we then completely caveated this, Villa had dropped the least points from winning positions in the entirety of the Premier League, with 5. And that is the metric for good game management, surely. That's
absolutely,
that's that you go to define how good a game manager a manager is. And Villa lead the league, and it did until we dropped a further 2, and I think we're still within the top 5. But I don't think the substitutions were there, and I think Villa now are starting to feel the negatives of Dean not necessarily knowing his strongest 11, because you see the same faces introduced, but in slightly different positions and scenarios and roles each game.
Yeah.
As I think we undergo that project of finding where players best sit in. So 1 week Anwar might be introduced on the left, 1 week Anwar might be introduced on the right. Trezeguet comes on, scores 2 goals, suddenly he's starting. John McGinn goes away, plays well with Scotland, he's pushed into the 10. Nakamba comes in some games, plays a 6. Douglas is dropped next to him, then Sanson will come in, and suddenly Luiz is an 8 with Sanson as an 8. And it's like it's real sort of, as we continue to go forth in this Villa side and find out exactly what our strongest team is, the sort of mismatch of players who we still don't really know where they play, where they're best unfolded, is going to come back to haunt us in games like this, because we are still going through that process. And when we can't bring players on and rely on them and trust exactly what we're going to get from them, then it haunts you. I think Keenan certainly was the answer today. I can see I think Dean's favoured the shape and everything like that, and with Ollie scoring, perhaps it would have been harsh to put him out wide if you're going to stay with the 4-3-3 and not go to the 2 up front. For Keenan, it's a difficult one. I do agree, but as I said, I think that brings back to whilst Villa have used the least number of players from a squad in the whole league this season, which
The lack of trust there.
yeah, exactly, because we're still undergoing that process, and I think that floors us in games like today.
Yeah, and I mean, against the worst team, as we kind of said, again, in Fulham, it works sometimes. That's just the nature of the game, Dan, isn't it? We can't forget that despite how poor Liverpool have been, how great of a side they actually are, how daunting of a place Anfield actually is. We haven't managed to successfully do a league double on them since the 1992-1993 season, which, oh my God, Villa. And, with some of the Liverpool teams that we've had since is just crazy to think. And even some of the Villa teams we've had since, it is a little bit crazy. And as we're kind of rounding up this podcast now, Chelsea seem to be 2-0 up against Crystal Palace. Villa are sat in 10th with a game in hand. Leeds going above us today with an absolutely remarkable win against Manchester City. And of course, I benched Stuart Dallas this week and chose two Manchester City defenders. I'm glad I'm not alone there with 14 points sat on the bench. I think there's a lot of people playing FPL who've done that. But listen, I think, Villa are on 44 points. We're now 5 points away from Tottenham. If that seventh spot gives you the Europa League or Europa League Conference, it's not happening, is it? We have Manchester City next on Wednesday, Dan. We're then looking at West Brom at home, Everton away, Manchester United at home, Crystal Palace away, and then Tottenham away.
That's a week Wednesday as well, isn't it? The Man City game. I don't think it's like the Wednesday.
Oh, it is. Yeah, you're right.
It's
the 21st of April. I've only just noticed that. You're right. So we've actually got quite a long time. So if you guys want to see a Football Manager stream in between, let us know. Yeah, we need to do it. It's been a while, Morgan and Wise. But seeing out the season, Tottenham away, and then finally Chelsea at home. I mean, a points haul isn't looking too high for any of these games, really, is it, Dan? I think the dead certs are Tottenham, and that's it, just because of how poor they have really been this sort of second half of the season. But it's going to be difficult, and I feel we can't be too disappointed today, Dan. I think
no, absolutely not.
The rest of this season is about experimentation. We have a few games without Jack Grealish. Hopefully, this sort of gap between the games, as we've literally just seen, lends itself to a Grealish return against Manchester City. Fingers crossed, midweek games under the lights at Villa Park is, it's Jack Grealish territory, isn't it? You've got to hope. And if not, I mean, there's no point in rushing him back. I would much rather we only see Jack for 3 or 4 games, maybe, ensure he's fit for the Euros. I mean, I'm always a club over country man, but Jack Grealish transcends that. We want him going with England to the Euros, Dan, don't we? He's England's only hope of winning the goddamn tournament. So we just have to, as I say, manage that. Maybe try a few new things, not necessarily against these big boys. Give them more minutes to Ramsey. I feel like we're definitely going to see him against the likes of West Brom and Everton, maybe even Crystal Palace as well. Who knows? But Dan, I mean, as we've kind of laid down, we've laid down the stats. We had a bit of time to kind of stew on that. I'm not feeling too bad. I still feel like it is a point that Villa could have had and maybe deserved, but how many games? You can't really account for a Trent screamer, dare I say, with a congested box. Really, he's done really well to score that. Of course, frustrated. Please don't get that twisted. I feel like sometimes, Dan, when we, of course, I know a lot of you guys appreciate that Dan and I try and take a sort of objective approach to this. But listen, if you're listening and not watching, I'm sat here wearing a Villa shirt. Of course, I want Villa to win. But sometimes you just have to appreciate, what has beaten you or what has successfully managed to take points off you. So if you guys enjoyed this podcast, let us know by hitting a like, comment your thoughts below on the game. Let us know who your man of the match was and how you're feeling ahead of this Manchester City game. And Dan, before we go, do we have any final words from yourself, mate?
Yeah, just quickly. Real nice touch on the celebration, Ollie. Congrats on another child. We're absolutely delightful here on the Villa podcast. Hopefully they'll join us one day. The little celebration with the love it. Very Totti. Lovely.
Oh yeah, we love Totti. Wow, what a guy. Yeah, I mean, Ollie, what a guy. He's surely got to be in for a shout of man of the match. So as I say, let us know in the comments below. And if you are not subscribed, please do so. It's free, and over 55% of you watching this podcast right now on YouTube are not subscribed. So it would mean the most if you could. Up the Villa.